Hi, everyone. So Gaza's in the news, of course, with the potential takeover of Gaza by the Israeli army and military. So the whole Gaza area, let's just go through the history a little bit to understand like how we got here, because many of the people interested in Gaza are only familiar with the last, few decades of history there and don't really understand the history of the region and the history of the Gaza Strip. So let's go back into history. How did the Gaza Strip become an entity? Like the land of Israel, also known as Palestine, is a specific land set apart in the Bible, and it includes the Gaza Strip. But the Gaza Strip is its own piece of land. And how did it become that piece of land? Because in ancient times, the Philistines settled there. The Philistines settled there way, way, way back. Not as far back as the Canaanites, though. So basically, after Noah and his sons land on Mount Ararat, where Turkey meets Armenia, they live there, they start to settle and multiply. Eventually, Noah's sons and grandsons begin to fight amongst themselves, and Noah creates a lottery and assigns the three sons to three different pieces of the earth. And then the grandsons are also choosing lots and are also assigned their lots within those three pieces of earth. Let's talk about Canaan for 1 second. Canaan was a son of Ham. His plot that he was assigned was West Africa. But instead of settling there, he goes and he settles what becomes the land of Israel, otherwise known as Palestine or Syria Palestina, just this piece of land from Lebanon to the river of Egypt. So the Canaanites settle there, and they're settling in the wrong land. So what happens? Noah's sons and grandsons go and see Canaan and his kids, and they say, you've settled in a land that isn't yours and that wasn't allotted to you. Don't do this. If you do, you're going to be cursed, because they had all agreed to an oath and agreed to be cursed if they break the oath. So Canaan is the one of all the grandsons of Noah who breaks this oath just downright, and he settles in this land. And the Canaanites had settled all over the land, including in the Gaza Strip. So the first settlers of the Gaza Strip are Canaanites. And Canaanites are Hamites, meaning they're Africans, they're West Africans, they're children of Canaan. All right, so that's the beginning of what we know as the Gaza Strip. What happens next? We learn about what happens next from Deuteronomy. So the Philistines now were an Egyptian people. They were children of Mizraim, son of Ham. So the Philistines are also Hamites. They're also not allowed to be in that land, but they come later than the Canaanites. They come at around the 14th century BCE. Seems like a really long time ago. 14th century BCE is when the story of the Philistines begins, when they get to the land of Israel, to the land of Gaza. They had settled first in Kaftor, which is what we know as Crete. And we know this from all sorts of quotes throughout the Bible, in Deuteronomy, Joshua, Amos, Jeremiah. And when they get there, the Philistines, there is a Canaanite group living there, and the Philistines destroy them. They destroy what's known as the Avim, who are a Canaanite group, and they settle in their place. Now, in the 13th century BCE, we have the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, where God tells Moses straight out in Exodus 13:17 to avoid the area of the Philistines in Gaza because the newly freed slaves are not ready for war. The quote is, God did not lead them by way of the lands of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So these fierce Philistine people had conquered the Canaanites that were living there, and they were so intense that God says, listen, Israelites should not go anywhere near them. They're crazy. You'll deal with them another time, because that land is part of the land that God commands the Israelites to conquer, but they don't get around to that till a little bit later. So in around 1200 BCE, the tribe of Judah briefly captures Gaza after Joshua's conquest of the land. But the Philistines do regain control. However, this shows an early claim to the area by the Jewish people. So there's no Muslims there, obviously. Islam doesn't exist, and there's no Arabs there because the children of Ishmael are somewhere else entirely. But right now, the Philistines and the Canaanites, who are again Hamites, they're Africans, they're there, and they are conquered, but then they regain control of the territory. So those are the three players. We have Canaanites and Philistines and Israelites. And the Israelites are the ones that God tells to go conquer this land. We're going to get to when the Arabs show up in the picture. Now, in around 1200 BCE, Samson had a whole love story with a girl named Delilah. Samson was basically in a war with the Philistines, and Delilah goes and finds out his secrets, finds out what gives him his powers, and so her elders are able to then capture Samson, and Samson eventually starts growing back his hair, which was his secret weapon that they shaved off in order to capture him, and they gouge out his eyes. They capture him and they kept him captive, but as his hair starts to grow back, he starts to regain some of his powers. He had tremendous strength, and when they had tied him up in some temple to their gods, when they were having some party, he ends up bringing down the temple and all these people inside of it, including himself. He says, "Let me die with the Philistines." This story is in Judges 16. So that's also in Gaza, a famous story. Now, around 1000 BCE, during King David's reign, Gaza was a Philistine stronghold, but his victories, like killing Goliath, who was from Gat, near Gaza, strengthens the Israelite influence. The Philistines are essentially under King David's dominion when King David rules over this area. They still live there, but King David is ruling there. And in around 800 BCE, there's a king called Uzziah, also from the tribe of Judah, of course, because Gaza is part of the tribe of Judah's land, as per God and the territories that God makes clear to Joshua, to Moses, and in the Bible, and in the Tanakh. And so King Uzziah asserts Jewish control over the Philistine city. So again, the Philistines who took over from the Canaanites, neither of those are supposed to be in that land. They're not even from Shem. They're not even from Arpachshad. They're not supposed to be in that land. King Uzziah comes, and in 2 Chronicles 26, he went out and made war against the Philistines, broke down the wall of Gat, the wall of Yavne, and the wall of Ashdod. So he starts breaking down the walls of their cities and really conquering them in 800 BCE. In 600 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem, destroys the first temple, kills many Jews, and exiles the Jews. But what happens also in Gaza at this same time? At this same time, Gaza and Philistine cities are totally conquered by this Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar. He exiles many of the inhabitants to Mesopotamia, and the Philistine rule ends. The city becomes part of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And so after 604 BCE, these exiled Philistines, who are called the men of Gaza in Babylonian records, they maintain a certain identity for about 150 years until they just completely assimilate to wherever they are, which was normal for when these giant empires would conquer lands, kill people, and exile the people there. They would assimilate. That's what the Islamic Empire does also all the time. They'll go into a village in Africa, for example, slaughter all the men, take the women captive, take some of the men captive maybe who are young, and eventually they assimilate into their culture. They don't have a choice. For the Philistines, it's not like they had gods like a Dagon, they worshipped idols, but they didn't have enough of a real identity of their own when they were conquered and taken elsewhere to hold on to it. So 150 years later, by 450 BCE, there's no more record of the ancient Philistines, the people of Gaza. What happens to them? They assimilate into the Babylonian Empire like countless other groups did. So that's the end of what we know of as the Philistines of the Bible. What else is going on in Gaza, though? Because now it's settled by these Babylonians. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II captures Gaza's port after conquering Egypt. So it's right bordering on Egypt, Gaza. It was part of Egypt between 48 and 67. But they don't want it anymore. They decided they really don't want it. It's full of really extremist people. So the Egyptians haven't wanted it since then. But we're not there right now. The Persian king captures Gaza's port. It was a very important port there in 525 BCE, and he incorporates it into the Achaemenid Empire, which we know as the Ahasuerus Empire. This is the empire that the story of Esther happens within. And it has a small Jewish community persisting because, again, Jews had conquered that land. It was part of Judah's plot. Jews had taken over that land during the time of King David and Uzziah. And so there were Jewish communities that were very, very ancient. We're talking about 500 BCE. Zephaniah now prophesies Gaza's desolation, but also its restoration to Judah's remnant, suggesting a Jewish return post-Babylonian conquest. So we have in the prophet book Zephaniah 2:4-7 some prophecies about how Gaza will become deserted and Ashkelon will be deserted. The seacoast will become the possession of the remnant of the house of Judah. So eventually the people of Judah will come back and will live there and settle there as they've been meant to this entire story. Because the Israelites are children of Arpachshad, children of Shem, and that's who this plot of land was supposed to go to. It's within the plot of Arpachshad. It's a specific group of Shem's children, and it's Israel specifically. In the 3rd through the 2nd century BCE, Gaza's port was contested by Seleucid and Ptolemaic rulers. So who are these people? This is when Alexander the Great was conquering vast swaths of land, and then after he dies, these generals of Alexander the Great now split up the empire amongst themselves. And that's how the Seleucids, who are really Syrians, end up taking over the land of Israel at that time. But the area of Gaza was sort of on the edge there between the Ptolemaic, who were in charge of the Egyptian area, if I'm not mistaken, and the Seleucids, who were, again, they were more connected to Syria. And so this area of Gaza is right in between, and it was contested. But there were Jewish communities of around 1,000 people who were under Hellenistic influence, meaning the Greeks. And Yonatan the Hasmonean besieges Gaza in 145 BCE. This is during these wars that are related to the Hanukkah story, when the family of the Maccabees, who were a priestly family, fight back against this Greek influence where they've been forbidden to keep Shabbat and forbidden to learn Torah and forbidden to circumcise. They're being terribly persecuted by the Seleucid Empire specifically. And so they fight back. So Yonatan the Hasmonean besieges Gaza in 145 BCE, and Alexander Yanai captures it in 96 BCE, showing military engagement by the Jewish people. And this is told in 1 Maccabees 1161. He encamped against Gaza and surrounded it. So this is when the Maccabees, essentially, or the Hasmoneans, are conquering Gaza and ruling over Gaza, because Jews have lived in this area since we came back after the Babylonian exile, and like we said, started to settle there long before that, when King David had ruled there and King Uzziah had ruled over the land. So Jewish settlements there were normal and ancient. Now the Israelites are not an empire, they're not a colonial people who would rule vast swaths of land. We're talking about a very specific piece of land, the land of Israel, which is promised in the Bible and to Moses and to the Israelite people in real life. All right, so after the Hasmoneans conquer this area of Gaza, the Jews settle in this land, and eventually the Romans take over, and they have this whole desecration and destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, but Gaza is not destroyed. And so Jews continue to live in this Gaza area for a long time. And by the 4th century CE already, Gaza's Jewish community numbers around 2,000, and it is a thriving hub for international trade, maintaining synagogues and ancient cemeteries near the Gaza port, which are used for centuries to come. So that's a big community in ancient times, thousands of people, and that is a Jewish hub. By 6th century, we have a synagogue in Gaza that still today we have the mosaic floor from it. There's a 6th century CE synagogue with a mosaic floor near Gaza City. It was discovered in 1965, and it proves a strong Jewish presence of several thousand, at least during the Roman and Byzantine times, with active religious and cultural life. In 637 CE, here we have the Arab forces under Amir ibn al-As conquering Gaza. They kill many, many Jews who were defending the city, and they are the descendants of those who built the synagogue, which was built in 508 CE, which is 6th century CE. So some 3,000 people are killed by the Arab invaders and colonizers. who came from the Arabian Peninsula and went out really, really far, conquering vast swaths. And until today, the same ideology conquers people every day, kills people every day, while trying to convince you that it's the Jews and the Israelis and the Israelites who are the bad guys and the colonizers, when that couldn't be farther from the truth and the reality. In 1100 CE, Crusaders conquer Gaza, they capture its port, and they massacre or expel Jewish and Muslim residents. The Jewish community, which was only a few hundred by that point, was nearly eradicated until a later revival. From the 13th century, Gaza's Jewish community, likely a few hundred people, maintained cemeteries near the old port. In the 16th century, Gaza's Jewish community, numbering 500 to 1,000 Sephardic exiles from Spain. So in 1492, the same year Christopher Columbus, now we know he was a Sephardic Jew, fleeing persecution, there was a terrible thing, the Spanish Inquisition. Basically anyone who wasn't their specific brand of Catholic was burnt at the stake, and people had to flee and run away. Even forced converts were really not that accepted. It was a terrible, very, very dark time. So everyone was kicked out of the Spanish peninsula. Portugal had the same thing. And so people came from Spain back to Israel through the water, landed in Gaza, and settled there again. And by this point, it's just a hodgepodge of different kinds of people. But the point of this video is to show there is a presence of Jews that never stopped from ancient times. Because if anyone is truly indigenous to the land, it is, of course, the Israelites who are indigenous to the land of Israel, which is also known as Palestine, and not the Arabs who come as invaders during the invasions of the Arab colonial time period, which, slowed down, but really does continue to this day for those who have eyes to see it. And so in the 16th century, we have these chief rabbis who begin to rule in Gaza, meaning there is such a presence that they have not only a community, not only synagogues, but they have chief rabbis who lead their religious and scholarly life. It's a thriving center once again. In the 17th century, we have Rabbi Yisrael Najera, who was the chief rabbi at that time, and he is the one who writes a very famous song called Kari Bon Olam, which is still sung today on Friday nights. And he was buried in Gaza's Jewish cemetery in 1625. And the community of around 1,000 people included scholars like Nathan of Gaza. In 1799, during Napoleon's invasion, Jews in Gaza, numbering a few hundred, faced abuse from French soldiers and local Arabs, which forced many to flee to Hebron, nearly wiping out the community. So there was ongoing persecution of the Jews ever since the Jews' rule in the land ended with the Hasmoneans in the time of the Seleucid Empire. Ever since then, other people are coming through and colonizing the land and taking over this land and not being very nice to the indigenous population because they want to rule. And so they subdue the Jews and their rights in their indigenous ancestral homeland. In 1886, Zev Kalonymus Wysotsky of the Chovevei Tzion movement, famous for Wysotsky teas, he revives the Jewish presence through commercial ventures, and he puts 54 Jews back in Gaza City and 830 Jews in the Gaza subdistrict by 1922. So this, again, presence of Jews did not start in 1948 and obviously goes back thousands of years as we've been telling this story. In 1929, the Arab riots during the British Mandate kills Jews, like Dr. Chaim Israeli, in Be'er Tuvia, as well as a Jewish convoy that was escaping Gaza, which was stoned. This was one of the pogroms during the 1929 period, where there were pogroms all throughout Israel in Hebron, Jerusalem, Tzfat, and Gaza. So many Jews were killed in 1929 by the Arabs. Again, this is way before the state of Israel is rebirthed in 1948. So Gaza and the land of Israel passes hands from the Ottomans to the British and then to the Israelis. In 1948, Gaza becomes part of Egypt because Egypt conquers it in this war of 1948. And then Israel conquers it back in 1967. From 2000 to 2005, during the Second Intifada, there were ongoing Palestinian terror attacks, including suicide bombings and rocket fire from Gaza, killing over 1,000 Israelis and 64 foreigners, with thousands injured. And so Gaza is becoming a terror hub during that time. Obviously, the UNRWA is part of a problem, is part of this very, very bad situation where in 1948, when Israel is born and the 5 Arab armies declare war, and all the Arabs, or many of the Arabs within Israel, start to slaughter all the Jews, obviously with genocidal intent to destroy all the Jews, which is their chant, Itbach al Yehud, slaughter the Jews. When the Jews fight back for their self-preservation and win, the UN decides that this is some sort of unique situation, and basically the bad guys get control of the UN and declare that all the Arabs who had actually started the fight and started the war are now somehow these victims, and so they need to be given all these extra special rights that nobody else in the world gets. And they're taught, and they were taught for many, many decades, basically the same idea of Itbach al Yehud, kill the Jews, slaughter the Jews, and destroy Israel. And so the UN has been funding this terrible situation in Gaza. Instead of them de-radicalizing, they became extra radical, to the point that in 2005, Israel decides on a unilateral disengagement and says, you know what? We're going to give you this entire piece of land, way bigger than Gaza City, way bigger than the Gaza port, an entire strip of land. We're going to give it to you. You can have it. Egypt didn't want them back. And they say, you know what? We're going to leave. You take this plot of land, make it your own Garden of Eden. We certainly loved our time there. And they give it over to the Arabs to settle. So they evict the Jews, the Israelis, who have never really evicted mass swaths of Arabs from Israel. The West Bank is a different situation, where Jews were ethnically cleansed by the Jordanians from the West Bank when the Jordanians had control over it. But there are 2 million Arabs in Israel. 21% of Israel is Arabs. So there isn't mass evacuation of Arabs from Israel. No. But no Jews are allowed to live in lands that are ruled by Palestinians, or even people can't sell their homes to Jews in these lands. Even within Israel, people can get in trouble in their extremist communities for selling land to Jews. But what Israel does is something unprecedented. They evict 8,000 settlers, 8,000 Jews from Gaza, 21 settlements, beautiful settlements that were built on uninhabited dunes like Gush Katif, where they had really good relations with the Abu Madayan Bedouin tribe near them. They would share water, they would trade with one another, they got along very well. So the Jews were happy there, Bedouins were happy with them there, they had a good life there, and they didn't want to leave, and over 8,000 Jews were forcibly evicted from Gaza. And that was terrible. And so Israel withdraws in 2005 and gives Gazans this piece of land. Gives the Arabs the land to rule over, and says, you know what, you can have it, have fun. But that was never good enough for them. They wanted the entire land of Palestine, also known as Israel, also known as the Holy Land or the Promised Land, the land of Israel, the land of the Israelites. They wanted all of it. So post-2005 disengagement, we have Hamas's rise. After all the settlements are removed, Hamas wins a fair election in 2006 and never holds elections ever again. In 2007, they violently seize control and they kill 161 and wound 700 of their own people when they clash with Fatah, another political party, who they threw off all the roofs and terrorized until there was no more Fatah. So that's why there is no Fatah, also known as the PA, the Palestinian Authority, in Gaza, because the Gazans are very extreme. And so when they took control, it was, even though they had gotten control in a vote, they were voted in, but they stayed in without any further votes ever again. From 2005 to 2014, Hamas and other groups fired around 20,000 rockets and mortars at Israel. So Israel left and they planned to never return. They took out all their military and they wanted to just completely be done with it. And they had given the land to the Arabs, but that wasn't enough. And so tens of thousands of rockets were fired on the Israelis. Civilians were targeted. There were terror attacks like abductions against Gilad Shalit in 2006. They right away abduct a soldier, Gilad Shalit, and they keep him for years. And Israel and Egypt impose a blockade on the Gazans because they are very, very extreme. So it's really not on Israel. It's the same idea with just anyone who's a neighbor of Gaza who knows them, knows that they are extreme and they just want to conquer more land. And it's ironic because the original Philistines we were talking about gets its name from palash, which is to invade. These were invaders. They were violent invaders who wanted to grow their territory on lands that were not promised to them. Crete is also part of Shem's plot, according to Jubilees. And so the fact that these Philistines, who were Mizraimites, son of Ham, they were Egyptians, essentially they were supposed to settle in the land of Egypt, west of the Nile. Instead, they go and settle Crete and then the Gaza area, but they want more and more and more. And so if you want to say that the Gazans of today are a blend of Arabs and all sorts of people who lived in that land, like Babylonians or even ancient Philistines, perhaps some returned somehow, it only just makes more sense that they are so violent and extreme and just want more and more and more land for themselves when they don't belong in that land. They're not indigenous to that land. That land was not promised to them. It does not belong to them. So now there's a blockade on Gaza and there are restricted goods going in there, but they manage to get plenty of materials, plenty of cash, plenty of weapons, and they store up just planning the demise, planning for when they can attack Israel. That's their entire identity and reality. And sadly, it's not just for like the extremists, it's really for the entire population. Pretty much the entire population of Gaza is raised to believe that they should kill all the Jews and conquer Israel. It's pretty terrible, but that's what leads us to modern conflicts, which we're getting to. In 2006, Hamas-led militants abduct Gilad Shalit via a cross-border tunnel. So all this time they're building these tunnels in order to invade Israel and, you guessed it, kill all the Jews, prompting Israel's Operation Summer Rain. Shalit was held until 2011. Now there's a bunch of conflicts in 2008-9, 2012, 2014. These smaller conflicts involve thousands of rockets by the Gazans and Israelis needing to go in and basically destroy the terror infrastructure that they know about. So if they know about storage of weapons, they'll go in and attack it and try to destroy it. But this is, everyone knows, a tinderbox, because if their entire identity from when they're babies is just to Itbach al Yehud, then, eventually it's going to blow up. And that's what happened in 2023. On October 7th, Hamas's attack kills 1,195 Israelis and foreigners and takes 251 hostages, triggering an ongoing Gaza war. This was a brutal, brutal, brutal attack against civilians and against foreigners, against Muslims, Bedouins, anyone they passed, pregnant women, babies, children, women. There was a lot of sexual violence and rape against living, dead, male, female, young, old, very, very sick people who were on a lot of drugs as well. And so that's how we get to the current Gaza war. And that's how we get to what's going on right now, where Israel needs to essentially go in and basically take back over the Strip. Israel had control over the Strip. It gave it to the Arabs and said, here, make your own little piece of land. You can have it. If it means that much to you, go ahead. But it's never going to be enough. When they want to genocide all the Jews, it's never going to be enough. Of course, we know that Jews and Israelis are not genocidal. They have 2 million Arabs living within proper Israel who have full rights, who sit on the high courts, who are in the government, who are in the universities, who are in the hospitals, doctors, professionals. They love it there. They're happy there. And it's a very, very interfaith kind of situation in Israel, which is something you don't see in any of the Palestinian territories. And it's something that you don't see in any of the Arab states, except for now more in, for example, the United Arab Emirates. We see a little beacon of hope. So that's it. For a list of sources, check out the description. I'll put all the sources that I used. This is all very verifiable stuff. The ancient history of the Israelites in the land, who the land actually belongs to, certainly doesn't belong to Arabs, but they were given a shot to have their own piece in the Holy Land but they totally blew it, and it's over. So now Israel is going to go in and take back over the land of Gaza as part of the land of Israel. Perhaps another Arab community will want to give their try at ruling over it, but the Israelis will make sure that in October 7th can never happen again. We understand now that it was a mistake. The disengagement was done because people believed that that piece of land was not strategic. They didn't need it. And that was false. That ended up being completely wrong. It was very necessary because without it, it turned into a giant terror heap. And that's what led to October 7th. So there we've gone through the entire history of Gaza. I hope you appreciate this video. I appreciated doing this video. It's important to learn the history of Gaza, to not get just totally confused and thrown off by what people want to convince you about the actual history. This is the history. We know the history. Don't be radicalized. Don't just believe anything that people throw at you. Let us know in the comments below what you think. Have a great day. This is Modern Jubilees, and we'll see you next time.